Guten Tag, buenos dias, bonjour, ciao, goedemorgen, shalom, marhaba. Hello everyone. My name is Erin Jones. I am the Director of Equity and Achievement for the Federal Way School District. I was previously one of the Assistant State Superintendents for Public Instruction at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. I am joining you today from Sacramento, California. As a matter of fact, when you watch this, I will be doing a retreat at the same time you are up in Washington State with my staff. But I have been asked to share with you about 10 minutes, just a little brief discussion about why diversity. You're embarking on a new adventure. And I want you all to hear a little of my perspective after doing this work for about 20 years now about why diversity, what is diversity? Is it all about Martin Luther King Day and potlucks with lots of great food and music? Or is there something more that we need to be doing in our work? And so I want to begin today by really talking a little bit about what diversity means, telling you a little bit of my story, and then talking about how does this all translate for you in the work you do. And so I'll be taking a look with you at your mission statement and your values and talking about how do you apply these things about diversity to the work that you do every day so you can feel like you're being the most effective and efficient possible. So let's start out with a conversation about diversity. For many, many years, when people hear the word diversity or they hear the word in education, we talk about cultural competence now. It's one of those buzzwords that has really loaded many meanings. For some really negative meanings. Oh, we've already done this before. I'm tired of potlucks and singing. To others who feel like they've been offended before or they've been made to feel guilty. That is not at all how I like to think about or talk about diversity. Diversity is the many ways that we are different. That's as simple as diversity is. It's not about race necessarily. It's about race. It's about class. It's about values. It's about religion. It's about sexual orientation. It's about the region we grew up in. It's about the language we speak at home, the language we speak at work. It's about the way we dress. It's about the way that we interact. Diversity is a beautiful thing, but it is also a very complex thing. It is not simple. And that's why it's something that you really need to work toward. It's not something you just get. And it's not something that just because you're a brown person, you automatically understand. Many of you probably looked at me and you made assumptions when you saw my face for the first time. Oh, here's an African American woman. Or maybe you thought I was Native American. Or maybe you thought I was Latina even. And then I began to speak languages. My reality is what you see when you see me in person is not at all who I am. It does not tell you about the breadth of diversity that I have experienced in my life, the breadth of diversity that I bring into a room every time I enter it. I am a biracial young lady who was raised beginning at 5 years old in the Netherlands by two Scandinavian Americans. It doesn't get a whole lot more diverse than that. And so I grew up speaking English and Dutch and then French when my father began teaching in Switzerland during the summer, and then Spanish when I added a fourth language. I have traveled across Europe. I've played basketball and soccer in 11 or 12 countries across the globe. I'm an academic. I was a classroom teacher for 12 years. I was assistant state superintendent for 3. I have done many, many things. And I think my story, even though it may sound really lofty and exciting, my story is really not so different from so many of you. Oftentimes we make a lot of assumptions about people. And the reality is that each of us brings many differences, many unique characteristics and qualities and experiences to the table. And really our study of diversity is how do we look at those things and really celebrate what each of us brings to the table, not look at it and say, oh, that's different, I don't really like it. Or, oh, they're different, so I'm a little scared. How do we really look at the people around us in our work and the people with whom we interact through our work in a way that celebrates the uniqueness that each one brings to the table? And so now, in my work at the district and Federal Way, my job is to really help our district think about how do we create equity? Equity is not equal. Some of our students come to us with limited English. And so if we were to give them the same thing that every other student gets, they would never arrive at the same level of success. And so when I think about diversity and I think about work, I think about how do we make sure that we level the playing field. It means for some of your clients, you may need to do more than for others. For some, you may need to provide different kinds of resources. And so I really want us to take a look at what does this mean for you in the work that you do. Your mission statement says, and I quote, "We independently resolve administrative disputes through accessible, fair, prompt processes and issue sound decisions." As I think about some of those words, accessible, fair, prompt, sound decisions, I want you to think about your own values. I want you to think about the way that you grew up. And then I want you to think about some of your clients. When we think about accessible, sometimes we think about access in terms of physical access. Are there ramps so that folks in wheelchairs can get into your building? But there are some other invisible accessibility issues. Do the folks even speak English enough to know that you exist? Are there populations that you're not able to serve simply because they do not know these services are available? And so how do you ensure in the work that you do that you are creating equal access for everyone? Because typically across our nation, in everything from education to advocacy in the legislature, those who have greater knowledge of what I call the rules of the game have greater access. And so how do we make sure that we really think about all the ways that we need to create smoother paths for folks to have greater access? When we think about fair, what does that mean? I tell folks in school all the time, as I said before, fair is not always equal. It's again, how do we level that playing field? So each student in education, but each adult that you interact with can walk in and be equipped with the same skills and tools they need to find success in your prompt decisions. As I look at your values, I want to read through them one by one, and I want you to think about them through the lens of equity, through the lens of diversity. So your first value is public service. You provide professional, competent, and high-quality service. You continuously improve through innovative problem solving and efficient processes. You are accountable and take pride in your work. There are some words that jumped out at me as I read that value statement. I think about continuously improving, and one of the things that we found in education is that the demographics of our state are dramatically changing. In some of our school districts, we have a 500% increase in the number of Latino students in a classroom. Now, what that means for us in education is maybe 10 years ago, you were an English teacher who had 30 out of 30 students who grew up in an English-speaking home. And today, only 10 years later, you could have a class with 15 Spanish-speaking students out of that 30. The way that you teach can no longer be the same. And so how do we make sure for educators that we provide them with the tools they need to be as successful with this new demographic? And so how does this impact your work? I want you to think about the demographic shifts from folks in poverty. There are much greater numbers of people in poverty right now. There are many greater numbers of folks from many different countries. Our immigrant numbers are much higher, not only for Latino families, but for Ukrainian families, for Somali families. You list, there's so many. And so how have you adapted as an agency to those new realities? Do you have the resources to make sure that you have translators available so that you know as you communicate, you are communicating in ways that are effective? Do you have efficient processes that are accessible to everyone? They may seem efficient to you because you understand, again, the rules of the game, but have you made those rules transparent to all of your communities? Your second value is respect. I love this one. This is my favorite one to talk about in terms of education, but I think this translates across every other field, including business. Your statement is, we treat everyone with dignity and respect. And yet I always push back with teachers. What does respect mean to you? because we tend to make assumptions that the way we understand respect is exactly the same way everyone understands respect. And what I know, having traveled the globe, is that respect is understood and projected differently based on how you grew up and where you grew up, based on the values that your parents trained you up in. And so as you think about respect and as you think about what is important to you, I want you to recognize that those values may not be the same for your clients. And so how can you begin to develop a new understanding of the people you are serving and ensure that what you mean as respect is understood as respectful by them? I give you this example, and this often happens in school with our Asian students, and not all Asian students are the same, but this is something that happens quite often for both Asian and African American students. In Asian culture, in many Asian cultures, it is standard for if a student is being disciplined by an adult, they look at the adult's feet as a sign of respect. And yet in schools, I know you've all seen this, you will see teachers say this to a student. Look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you. And that is because in American culture, primarily in white middle-class American culture, looking a person in the eyes is a sign of respect. And yet, that is not true for all cultures. And so I want you to think about, do you have examples in your work of times when maybe you've had great intentions, you've really intended to show respect, or you've expected respect in a certain way, and someone either has been late for a meeting or maybe they spoke to you in a way that you thought was disrespectful that maybe could be possibly just a misunderstanding, could be a cultural norm that is very different in their culture from yours. And so this particular value, respect, I tell people all the time, the greatest way to grow in this is for you to take a very clear, hard look at your own personal values. Think about, what does respect look like to me? And then acknowledge, just because respect looks like that to me doesn't mean that's the only way to show respect. And so I want you to take some time to really do that evaluation and then have conversations with your peers in the office. I think what you'll find is that some of you will have different understandings about respect, and I think the more conversations you can have about that with one another, the better you'll be able to serve your clients. Your next value is communication. You provide clear, open, and honest communication to promote understanding, cooperation, unity, and productivity. And again, it's back to that communication piece. Not everyone speaks the same English or speaks English at all. And so what I run into often in education circles, but also in working with the state, there is a language that is spoken in the professional world that is not the same language that is spoken on the streets or in houses. And so how can we make sure that we are clearly communicating? Obviously, if a person comes to you and they only speak Russian, the obvious response is to get a translator. But how often do we run into someone who doesn't speak professional English, who may completely misunderstand what we are trying to get across? Look at your documents that you're giving out. Are they able to be understood by a 7th grader? Because typically folks who are not well educated read at about the level of a 6th or 7th grader. And so I want you to think about all the academic language, all the professional language that is used in your documents, and make sure that you are working really hard to translate that down to a level that it's understandable to everyone, even to a child. Finally, your last value, employees. We are committed to the personal and professional development of our employees. We actively seek involvement and shared sense of commitment and service at all levels. I love this one because that's exactly why I've been asked to speak. You are committed to professional growth, and that's what this is all about. How do you begin to see diversity in a new way? How do you begin to grow as a person and to celebrate not only the people around you, but the people with whom you interact as officer and as client? And so the 2 things that I want to leave you with, there are 2 suggestions that I give every educator when I do trainings, but these 2 suggestions I believe completely apply to your work as well. Number 1, take a very clear, hard look That's your own personal life.